The story coming out of Cleveland this morning isn't really about the football anymore, even though the football was genuinely good. It's about something that happened in the stands during that football, and both quarterbacks in this competition addressed it directly once the media session started. Deshaun Watson got booed by his own home crowd yesterday, and neither he nor Shedeur Sanders was willing to let that slide quietly. I want to walk through everything that was actually said, because there's more nuance here than a headline can capture. Let's start with Todd Monken's evaluation of Sanders, because his answer was detailed in a way that goes well beyond the usual coach speak you get after a preseason game. He said there's a lot to like, that Sanders plays with real confidence, and that he's genuinely improved at getting the ball out on time. He pointed to a specific 3rd and 13 or 3rd and 14 conversion where Sanders held onto the ball just long enough to let his receiver clear the defender, rather than forcing something into a window that wasn't actually open yet. He also praised the anticipation on the red zone touchdown, saying Sanders correctly read that his tight end was going to break outside while the linebacker matched that leverage, only for the actual target to break in a little behind the coverage instead. Monkin noted the tight end probably could have caught that specific ball, and admitted it would have felt a lot better if that drive had actually finished with points, along with one of the other 2 opening drives that stalled out short of the end zone. Even with those missed opportunities, Monkin said he's genuinely proud of Sanders, and specifically credited the work they've put in together on cadence and operation at the line of scrimmage. He made an interesting point about drawing the defense offside on a shot play, getting Buffalo to jump before the snap on a rep where the Browns wanted to take a real shot down the field, and a separate instance where Sanders got the defense caught in the neutral zone. He was honest about where Sanders still has room to grow too, mentioning a 3rd and 12 situation where there was a real shot available downfield, but Sanders needed to see a flag on the ground that would have changed the math of the play, checked it down instead. And the offense ultimately didn't convert the 3rd and 8 that followed. That's the kind of granular play-by-play detail that tells you this coaching staff isn't just handing out empty praise. They're grading specific decisions, and for the most part, Sanders passed that grading with real distinction. On Watson, Monkin's tone shifted noticeably. He said he was disappointed collectively that the offense didn't play well with Watson running it, and pointed to the same issue that surfaced in the first preseason game too, getting stuck behind the sticks and constantly trying to play catch-up instead of staying ahead of the chains. He didn't pile on beyond that, but the disappointment in his voice was clear. And it's worth noting he used the word collectively, spreading responsibility across the whole unit rather than isolating Watson individually. Monkin was also asked directly about the timeline for naming an actual starter, and he was honest that he doesn't have a firm date yet, but he does want to get someone locked in soon so that quarterback can start accumulating all the reps with the first-team offense. That distinction matters enormously, and Watson himself spoke to exactly why when he was asked about it. He said building that kind of continuity is valuable for whoever ends up getting the job, not just for the quarterback individually, but for the entire offense, the offensive line specifically. Hearing one consistent cadence, one voice in the huddle, understanding exactly how that specific quarterback operates when things start to break down mid-play. That's a mature team-first answer, and it's worth remembering. Watson gave it even in the middle of a personally difficult stretch. Then the conversation turned to the booing, and this is where things got genuinely uncomfortable to listen to. Watson was asked whether he thinks those feelings from the fan base would dissipate if he's ultimately named the starter, whether he could build something positive with this fan base moving forward, or whether he'll always carry some of this with him. His answer was honest in a way that didn't try to spin the moment into something more comfortable than it actually is. He said the only time he actually feels that specific energy is inside the stadium or on social media. In public, away from those two settings, nobody's ever said anything to him directly. His read on that is pretty simple. The people doing the booing are doing it specifically because those are the only two environments where players can't respond back. That's a pointed observation, and I don't think it's an unfair one either. There's something worth sitting with in that specific answer, because it reveals a level of self-awareness that a lot of athletes never publicly articulate. He's not claiming the criticism doesn't exist, or that it doesn't sting. He's identifying exactly where it lives, in the two spaces specifically engineered to strip away accountability from the person doing the criticizing. A stadium crowd is anonymous by design. A social media account can hide behind a username. Neither format requires the person voicing that frustration to ever stand in front of Watson and say it to his face, and he clearly understands that dynamic better than most people give professional athletes credit for. He was pressed further on whether he can actually defeat that kind of negativity, given how demanding this position already is on its own. He admitted he doesn't fully know the answer, called it a mental battle he fights daily, and said, somewhat strikingly, that he actually feels more support on the road than he does at home. He referenced the last time he played on this specific field, when he tore his Achilles, and pointed out that same fan base cheered when he went down injured. He asked, rhetorically, what that reaction could possibly have to do with performance when a player from your own city gets seriously hurt in front of you. When asked directly if any of this makes him regret signing here in the first place, he said no. That he believes situations like this happen in his life for a reason, and that he's patient enough, as he put it, as a child of God, to wait for the tide to eventually turn. He said he's not tripping on it. In his own words, even while clearly still carrying real weight from that moment. Sanders, for his part, had a completely different kind of day to reflect on. He opened this game 8 for 8, capped by that touchdown to Luke Floria. And when asked whether that fast start let him settle into an easy rhythm right away, his answer was refreshingly grounded. He said no, honestly, that he doesn't really track a stat like 8 for 8 in his own head while it's happening. He said he arrives at that same locked-in place every single day in practice, and that whatever shows up on a Saturday is really just a direct translation of the version of himself he brings to work daily. When asked what he was proudest of building on from the first preseason outing into this one, he pointed to something simple, getting that very first completion of the game, and then just letting everything roll naturally from there. He also credited staying disciplined with the play clock and operating the huddle with control. Being careful never to let the clock run dangerously low in a way that could create an unnecessary hazard late in a play. He was asked to reflect on his growth since the off-season program began, and instead of diving into football mechanics, he turned the answer towards something more personal. His relationship with his faith, and how that's shaped his ability to walk into that same media room every single day and greet people with genuine kindness, regardless of what's being said about him publicly. He said that steadiness comes from a deeper sense of purpose that keeps him from getting emotionally rattled by outside noise, whether that's coming from strangers online or, as he put it directly, from reporters sitting in front of him. When a follow-up specifically asked how he's improved as a football player rather than as a person, he gently reframed the question again, saying football is simply one part of his broader life, and that he sees himself first and foremost through that same lens. There was a specific football moment worth digging into as well. A fourth down play to a tight end, where Sanders stood confidently in the pocket, comfortable waiting for his target to actually come open rather than bailing early. He explained the thought process behind that rep, saying the staff had an alternate look available depending on the front the defense showed, and he liked what he saw. A two-different front situation with man coverage on the backside. He talked about the mentality Monkin has instilled in this quarterback room, that you're not always going to land in the perfect version of a play. So the goal isn't forcing perfection. It's trusting your gut and playing off feel once you've committed to a decision. He stuck with the called play, worked through his progression, and said he has a growing sense for how these situations tend to play out, which let him settle into real comfort, trusting his guys would be in the right spots on the field. He also talked about genuinely loving pressure moments, specifically referencing the 2-minute drill as a situation he actively enjoys rather than fears. He connected that directly back to the touchdown to Floria, mentioning that the Browns had actually run that exact same 2-minute situation the last time they played this same Buffalo roster, and it hadn't gone well that time. He said he simply couldn't let that same outcome repeat itself a second time, and the way this game actually played out suggests that mentality showed up exactly when it needed to, Then came the question that mattered most for this entire story. Asking Sanders directly how he handled standing beside a teammate he's also competing against, someone who was clearly upset about what the fans had just done to him. Sanders didn't hesitate. He said, in general, he doesn't appreciate that behavior at all, regardless of the competitive dynamic between the two of them, because at the end of the day, they're all human beings. And he thinks that's a truth worth remembering inside that building too. He said he tries to live by a simple rule, not doing to others what he wouldn't want done to himself, and not putting people in situations that make them feel uncomfortable. He acknowledged that even he, just as a person, can sometimes make others uncomfortable without meaning to, and said he stays conscious of that in how he carries himself daily. He extended real appreciation to the fans for showing up and supporting this team, but was clear that however anyone feels about this specific quarterback competition, there's a baseline level of respect that should exist regardless, because every player on that roster is out there giving everything they have for this franchise. When asked how his relationship with Watson has evolved from a year ago through this entire competition, his answer was simple and genuine. Over time, he said, everybody's just gotten more comfortable with each other. Now here's where I want to give you my actual read on all of this. Both Monkin and general manager Andrew Berry have been genuinely impressed with how Sanders has commanded this offense, specifically the cadence and operational details. This staff explicitly said they wanted to see him improve on heading into this stretch of camp. He went out and delivered exactly that, and in doing so, put himself in a genuinely strong position heading into this decision. My personal take is that you go with the younger player here. He brings a different level of energy to this offense, gives this team a real chance to win now, and can pick up right where he left off from a year ago, when he closed the season by beating 2 divisional opponents and made the Pro Bowl in the process. There's no obvious reason for him to lose a job he's earned. Myles Garrett himself said last year this was Sanders' job to lose, and based on everything I watched this preseason, I think Sanders held up his end of that bargain. I don't think it's a coincidence either that the exact things this coaching staff flagged as areas for growth heading into this camp are precisely the things Sanders showed up and fixed in front of everybody watching. That's not a small detail. Plenty of young quarterbacks get identified weaknesses from a coaching staff and never fully close that gap within a single offseason. Sanders took specific, named critiques about his cadence and his operational command at the line and turned those same critiques into visible strengths by the time this preseason wrapped up. That kind of responsiveness to coaching is exactly the trait that gives a front office real confidence, handing a young player the keys to an entire offense. But even saying all of that, I stand fully with both Sanders and Watson on the actual booing itself. There was no reason for that crowd to treat Watson the way they did yesterday. He's a human being, first and foremost, and in my personal opinion, he didn't deserve that regardless of how the offense performed under him. Watson clearly didn't play his best football in this specific game. That part is true and worth saying honestly. But that still doesn't excuse the treatment. And if the roles were reversed, and it was Sanders getting booed like that, I'd be saying the exact same thing right now. These are still professionals, but they're also still people. And I think what happened yesterday was a mixture of both performance frustration and something much more personal underneath it. A real portion of that fan base doesn't want Watson leading this franchise regardless of how he plays. And if I'm being fully honest, some of that same fan base isn't fully sold on Sanders either. He actually took a subtle shot at the local media on this exact topic, suggesting there's a real lesson to be learned from how people have treated Watson, given some of what's been directed his way too, before crediting his faith as the reason he doesn't let that negativity affect him. I respect that response, because I try to operate the exact same way. If I hear it, I let it go. Because what actually matters is what happens between those lines on Saturdays. And based purely on what's happened between those lines this preseason, I don't think there's much room left for debate. Sanders has been the better quarterback across this entire competition. Higher completion percentage, fewer turnovers, real evidence of pushing the ball down the field, genuine accuracy on full display. At this point, in my opinion, this conversation is close to settled. Whatever this coaching staff ultimately decides in the coming days, I hope the conversation around this fan base shifts too. Competition between two quarterbacks is healthy, even necessary, and it's produced real growth in both of these players this camp. But there's a version of supporting this team that pushes players to be better. And there's a version that just tears a human being down for reasons that have nothing to do with football. Yesterday leaned into the second version, and both of the men actually living through this competition made that clear without needing anyone else to say it for them.